Dear wildling, I need your help. We create the Wild podcast with great care and a lot of love. I consciously choose to keep these conversations free and accessible to everyone. But only with your support can the Wild podcast continue to exist. With your donation, even if it's just €2 for every episode you listen to, you help to make it possible to keep this work going. Together, we can continue to build open, honest, and inspiring conversations. You'll find more information in the show notes or on the website. From the bottom of my heart, thank you ever so much. Welcome to Wild, the podcast for wildlings just like you. Wildlings who want to transform the prevalent plant blindness to collective plant wisdom. My name is Lieve Galle. I've been working as a herbalist and wild plant forager in Belgium since 2002. In those years, I've seen a lot of changes. Working with plants has become more popular, but I've also seen time is running out for our planet. As foragers and herbalists in Europe, sometimes we're dealing with different plant species and different cultural approaches towards plants. In some countries, working with plants is licensed, and in others, it's almost illegal. I believe that together we can learn from one another and be stronger. There is nothing more empowering than connecting wild souls. Together, we can have a greater impact on restoring the ancient link between people and plants. And that's why, for this podcast series, I'm talking to fellow herbalists and foragers in Europe. So if you're ready to find out what you've never been told, but what your soul already knows, welcome to Wild. Hello, wildling! Today I have a very special episode for you. One that was recorded at the annual meetup of the Association of Foragers. And this year's meetup was an extra special one as we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the association. Now, we have a couple of more episodes coming up with AOF members, but in this episode, I exchanged thoughts with different guests. You'll hear Fern Freud from Foraged by Fern, Richard Mawby from Forage Frolics, Nic from Nic Roams, Łukasz Łuczaj all the way from Poland, and last but not least, Monica Wilde. And please keep listening all the way to the end, because we have included a lovely piece about the origin story of the Association of Foragers. Enjoy!
I'm Fern. I run foraging workshops, and I have done for about 5 years. And I also have a social media channel as well, where I share lots of foraging sort of information and tips and advice and just weird experiments that I'm doing. And I sort of started foraging when I was about 11 or 12. My dad was incredibly irresponsible, and he'd found some of Roger Phillips' mushroom books in a charity shop. And he was like, right, kids, we're going out. Pick whatever you like. And it was, mid-mushroom season. And there were loads of things, and it was a really exciting day. And we just picked loads of things and put them in the basket. And then we got home, and, we were really like arty, crafty kids. So he was like, right, have a look in the book. If it says you can eat it, we'll eat them, which is terrible advice. Don't follow his advice. But so we spent ages sort of cutting them up and drawing them and, looking through these books and definitely misidentifying them because we were like 10. And then he went off and was like, right, I'm going to make some lunch. And thankfully my mum was home. So she was like, no, this isn't happening. You need to throw these mushrooms away. So did, and probably saved our lives in the process. But then we just loved it. And, whenever Dad had us for, a few hours or a weekend or whatever, and he'd be like, what do you want to do? We'd be like, oh, we want to go and find mushrooms. But, by that point, we kind of realised you can't just go and eat whatever you want. So we spent the first few years really just doing it and not eating anything and just learning as a family and, just looking at books and Googling and trying to work out what things were. And then we started eating mushrooms when we felt a bit more confident. And then we were like, what else can we eat? And it all went from there, really.
And how long have you been a member of the Association of Foragers?
I think about 5 years, maybe 4. But this is my first meetup.
All right. And how is that going so far?
Yeah, I love it. It's been really lovely and friendly and so nice to meet. There's so many people that kind of have inspired me over the years. And, I've read their books, or they were kind of like a go-to reference when we were growing up. So, yeah, it's really nice to kind of meet people in real life and be able to chat to them and just to say like, oh, I really loved like your book. And yeah, it's been great.
And not being the only wild weirdo in the room, right?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So one of the things I did here at the annual meetup was the workshop we had around the media. And you had quite the experience the past year with media. Would you want to share something about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So apparently, and this isn't something I knew before, every autumn the newspapers in the UK will do a kind of anti-foraging piece. And I've been told, like, last year it was the Polish, and the year before that it was, someone else. But this year, the attack was very much middle-class foragers, and they used my face. So I was kind of the unwilling face of the attack. And I wasn't contacted about it previously, and I wasn't asked for a quote. And it was really kind of painful and quite embarrassing. And it was a really tough time because I first found out about it. Someone had sent me a link to like the Daily Mail online news. And I was like, okay, I did panic. And I was like, oh my gosh, but my partner was really good. And he was like, look, Fern, the Daily Mail, they publish so many articles every day. Like, no one's going to see it. Don't worry. And then one of my family members probably really, without mean intention, but took a picture of a newspaper, like a in print, and took a picture and sent it to me and said, oh, have you seen this? And it was my face in print, and on the top it said, middle-class foragers are destroying the countryside. And my heart dropped, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I just couldn't believe it was happening. Because, you just don't expect it. And I think if you're, maybe a celebrity, or if you're someone who's in the public eye, you're bolstered for those things, you're prepared for those things. But if you're just some, like, nobody who's just sharing what they love doing online, you just don't expect it. So it came as such a, like, wild blow out of nowhere that it was really, really difficult. And I guess, yeah, you just kind of think, well, I know what I'm doing and I know my intentions are good. But, like, what about people who just pick up the newspaper and go, oh my God, I know her and she's destroying the countryside? And it was really like, it took me a good while and lots of like support from various people to get my head around it and kind of work out like, okay, hey, this is okay and this is manageable. And obviously my friends and family were a big part of that. And also the AOF was such an important part of that because I had people who knew what to do and what to say who were there to back me. And I hadn't actually been a very active member of AOF beforehand. I was sort of in the group, but I'm not overly sociable, so I didn't come to any of the meetings. But yeah, after that, I was really like, oh God, of course I need to go to a meeting because I am part of this community, and it's full of incredibly knowledgeable and helpful people. And obviously, we all stand for the same thing and have the same passion and want the same things, to be in the media, and we want the same message to go out to the the British public or whoever it is, and we want to share a same love of foraging and a same deep understanding that foraging can be a really good thing for the environment. So I felt, incredibly supported, and it was kind of, it turned out to almost be like, I mean, it was quite an emotional roller coaster, but it turned out to be quite a good thing. It was a good learning lesson, and it was a nice way to kind of almost get a big shove into the community to be like, go on, you need people to support you and be there for you. So yeah, quite a weird experience, but it's what it is.
So I have here with me Richard Mawby. Hi. First of all, can you tell us how long you've been a member of the Association of Foragers?
I first joined back in 2016. It was a second official meetup that was up in Leeds. And I think I was probably one of the youngest foragers to actually join the AOF. I was I must have been 26. And yeah, it was just amazing. I saw everyone face to face, and I've kind of grown up with them ever since over the last 9 years.
What exactly is it that you do as a forager?
I run something called Forage Frolics, which you'll find on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. But before I did start teaching, what inspired me to get into it was, so one year I had a very, very, very stressful year, and I just sort of let my diet slip, and I started to get a couple of tooth cavities, and I didn't want to go to the dentist because all they would have done was just take the tooth out. And I started doing alternative research, and I went kind of more primal paleo. And the more that I went onto that diet, the more that my senses cleared up. I lost a load of weight, and I was just staring at these wild plants that I'd grown up around. I knew what some of them were already, just not that they were edible. So I was just walking past the nettle, and it was just like this silent whisper, like, you can eat me, you can eat me. Like, I was very sensory with my approach. So I did a lot of sensory work first, seeing how my body felt about it before I actually researched it and looked up what that plant was, and then went away and started eating it. But it was just that first bridge, breaking through, eating that first nettle. So nettle was my gateway plant into foraging. But then after that, like a few years later, it was just a roller coaster. And then I thought, oh no, I saw Robin Harford doing some things, and I was really inspired by everything I was seeing online. So I gave him a call, and I asked him about teaching, about foraging and teaching, and we had such a lovely conversation. And then about like a year later, I decided to run my first foraging course, which kind of went quite terribly because it was raining and pouring, and I didn't want to charge for it. But bless the father that came with his son, he still gave me 20 quid, and I was like, that was my first foraging walk in the pouring rain, trying to do what with my basic knowledge at the time.
Why do you think it is important, like what we do here at the Association of Foragers? Why do you think it's so important for foragers to meet up and to connect with one another?
Well, fundamentally, I think it is the community and the connection, and it creates this sort of amazing foundation where you can bounce ideas off of each other, because we've all got such amazing different views and ideas, and then sometimes it just comes together, and you'll work with someone, you'll think of a new idea, and it's just always innovating in the foraging world. And I think what I've come to see over the years, and like even in other areas of life, is that we need that community and we need that connection. But also having the association means that there's so much going on in the world that is very anti-foraging in multiple ways. And I think one of the things that I remember when I first joined was that they wanted to create a sort of a base for being able to be active and proactive in sort of kind of dealing with some of these situations. And now, gosh, 9 years later, we've got over 100, I don't know, I don't know the full total, but we've got over 100 members. And that's such an amazing backing for like people who are competent with foraging, have the knowledge. We have the ability to then kind of tackle some of these things that are going on around the world. And I think that's a really good foundation to kind of have.
As for me, I really like how open and respectful the community is, because, that has been just amazing.
And I think the other important factor is that it's all based around certain principles. It's all common sense, essentially. It's about being responsible for nature, but this kind of enforces or buffers what we're all doing. And it's just so nice to be around other people who are being proactive and being like going out and teaching, going out and doing it in such a responsible way to then pass that on to everyone else, and that's just going to spread. It's like planting a seed.
Nic, tell me a little bit about how you got started with foraging, because you haven't been foraging for a very long time, I think.
Well, I started foraging for myself 7 years ago when I moved into a van and I wanted to get closer to nature. And I bought a foraging book and headed out into the woods. And I just kept going out at the wrong time, the wrong seasons. I had no idea that mushrooms grew at certain times and plants grew at certain times. So it was a big epic fail. But then I started being a practitioner in foraging 2 years ago. So I'm quite new to teaching, but not new to foraging as such.
And since when are you a member of the Association of Foragers?
So I joined last week. I think I might be the newest one here. Well, I applied back in December, and then it takes a month to hear back, or up to. And then I'd already seen through a friend who's also a member of the association that this annual meetup was happening. So as soon as I got the email to say, like, it's been confirmed, which I thought was crazy, like the fact I was going out 7 years ago and had no idea what was going on, and now I'm about to join an association with people whose books I have on my bookshelf and admire is incredible. Anyway, so a week before the event, I messaged and I was like, please, can I come? And fortunately, there was a couple of spaces left for me to join.
So far, how has it been for you, this meetup?
It's been horrible, save me. I'm joking. It's been really, really good. It's funny because when I shared with my partner and dad that I was coming to this foraging meetup, they're like, I couldn't think of anything more boring. And I was like, what? It's going to be incredible. Like, it's everything I love talking about and love doing. We've had workshops. It's just been really awesome. Saunas and wild swims, hikes. I honestly couldn't think of a more perfect weekend, and the people have been amazing. I think collaboration is important because of creativity, and for me, I'm self-employed, so I run foraging at Retreat Wild, but I'm self-employed, and therefore I don't really get to chat to anyone about it other than on social media. And although that's really lovely being able to connect online, there's still like a barrier. So coming together in this beautiful manor house in Dartmoor is just so lovely because you actually get to meet face to face and build proper connection, and I guess just geek out over everything foraging, and just so my focus is helping women connect with nature in their adulthood. So I feel that as an adult we lose our connection with nature because we end up going into the working world and getting swept up in all this chaos. So my goal really is to just help women find their inner child to come and play like outside again. So I do that through Retreat Wild in Mid Wales and North Wales.
That is beautiful, because I see so many women and they're like getting crushed under so many responsibilities in daily life, and they have to be productive, and there's so many expectations, and yes, the essence is really, you can always come back to nature and find yourself again. So it's like really important work that you do.
Yeah, like as the saying, like let your hair loose, or let your hair down, sorry. That's like what I want them to feel, like they come to this space. So it's called Retreat Wild because it's actually retreat into the wild, like come run away and relax. And there's obviously deeper levels as to why I wanted to do it, with like supporting with mental health and just giving them a space to breathe and reset their nervous system, which, you know, nature does for us, just organically, just being there for the 2 days, and to just teach more skills as well. So I do bushcraft and foraging, so they'll learn wilderness and survival skills. So it's also helping them build confidence. But the essence of it all, it is to just have fun and honour your inner child and just get back out and get mucky.
If you are in the middle of doing your foraging, do you ever meet other people that come up to you and say, hey, what are you doing here? And start a conversation? Or
I've had it once. I had my basket on me. Usually I don't actually go out with a basket because I don't really like to draw too much attention. But it was, we had an abundance of penny buns in Wales, I think across the UK this year. So I went out with my basket and I was like, I've got to find some. And I did have a guy stop and check in the basket and he asked what I was foraging for. And he got so excited and said, oh, there's mushrooms down there too. Like, you'll have to go check. There's so many. I didn't actually find them. He did direct me, but I got lost. And but I don't think they were edible, what he was pointing out. But I just loved how enthusiastic he was to see that people were foraging. Hopefully that inspires other people. Or he goes off and says, oh, I saw someone foraging, blah, blah, blah. And then someone goes, yeah, I'd love to try that, you know.
Yeah, it's nice if people have this spark of interest and this positive reaction. It's really funny that your family said that it would be boring to have like a meetup of foragers because it's like the most fun thing I could think of.
Yeah. Like this morning we did mushroom yoga and we were pulling different yoga poses to look like mushrooms and I just couldn't stop laughing through it, but like in a good way rather than a lack of confidence, awkward laughing way. And I came out then and I was like, that was so lovely to spend my morning doing yoga, but mushroom related.
I loved it. It was hilarious. If you would have to move to another side of the world, what is the one mushroom or the one plant that you would want to take with you?
Oh, it would definitely be a mushroom. I'm not a huge plant forager. I mean, I plant forage, but it's not where my love lies. My soul is a mushroom. I feel like this is the really standard one, but I love chanterelles. They're just so bright and they've got such a sweet scent and they're always really exciting to find. And I love working with them. I know some foragers, it's the penny bun, but I don't know, chanterelles make me happy when you see them. Oh, now I like amethyst deceivers as well because they're bright purple. Yeah, I don't know. It's so hard. That's a hard question.
It's like picking your favorite child, you know. It's
yeah, it is. I think there's just so many beautiful mushrooms out there, which is why I love them. And chanterelles because they're bright. Yeah.
Okay, and now I have Łukasz with me, you were the first international member of the Association of Foragers, right?
Yes, I got here 10 years ago.
From Poland?
Yes.
So how did you find out about the association?
I found out from Monica Wilde because I just recently met her then and you know, she invited me. But I was interested in foraging for decades and, you know, I started doing my workshops in 2002, so long time ago.
That's crazy because I also started in 2002, so yeah, that was a good year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what exactly is it that you're doing in Poland with foraging?
I work as a professor of biology, so I also teach foraging to the students. So I also make wild food courses, make 2-day workshops with cooking, make walks, and sometimes I make workshops in different countries, but usually in Poland. When I bought land, I wanted to be a forager, and it was 28 years ago, and I got interested in the survival techniques used by the different tribes and, you know, primitive people in North America or something. And then while living in the village, I discovered that local people have a lot of skills. They were not about wild edible plants, but, for example, they were making some kind of structures, or they knew how to make a handle for a scythe, or they were making some kind of digging out pine roots to get like these bits of wood which burned for a long time. So different kind of interesting skills. They had different words for things, for plants, for fungi. And I got interested in it. That's how I became ethnobotanist. First by exploring this knowledge from different countries, but actually then looking around and discovering that, you know, my neighbor was tapping sap from a few species of trees, and there was a neighbor who knew how to install houses in moss. So,
Wow.
you know, then when I built my house, I collected moss for myself for the house, and he taught me. He was the last person in Poland actually who had the skill of insulating with moss, and I was his student, so it was like amazing. I could come and insulate the house with the moss. Yeah, so look around.
And here is Mo Wilde, who runs the Wild Biome Project.
Now, I've been teaching foraging for around 20 years and helped set up the association. And yeah, the Wild Biome Project, which was all about what the effects of wild food have on us, is a passion project very close to my heart. One of the things about me is that I always like to know what the truth of something is. And I think this comes because my dad was a lawyer. So you always, as a child, I was one of 5 growing up, you always had to be able to sort of verify your facts and get to the bottom of things. So, when looking at plants and plant chemistry, and, some people would say, dandelion's got 5 times more vitamin A than spinach. And other people say, dandelion's got 3 times more, more vitamin A than spinach. And I think, well, which one is it? Is it 5 times more or is it 3 times more? In actual fact, plants are hugely variable. But it was those sorts of dichotomies that made me really want to explore what's really going on, both with plant nutrition, which of course led to the Wild Biome Project, and also with plant toxicity and poisons, because so many people are scared of foraging. They're afraid that they're going to eat something and poison themselves. And very often you get newspaper headlines which sound as if, plant poisonings are very common, or, lots of people are going to die from mushroom poisoning. But when you actually go back and look at things like hospital admission statistics and stuff, it's actually very, very, very low and very rare. So I'm just one of those people that like to get to the bottom of things and tell people what the truth is of things going on. It's not just about, finding the truth behind things and the facts behind things and putting it into context. And of course, if we don't, then, AI just repeats the same mistakes that Google does, which is it just tells you the most popular thing. So if there's already myth and misinformation on the internet, AI is just going to accelerate that, and people won't really know. But when it comes to accessibility, one of the really important things to me is that foraging is one of the last areas of our lives that isn't regulated, that you don't have to go to university, you don't have to have a degree in foraging to do it. And it's kind of like one of the last of our indigenous birthrights that is accessible to everybody, regardless of your nationality, your religion, your gender, anything else. This is one of the last of the things that belongs to us as an indigenous people. And I'm absolutely passionate about keeping it accessible to everybody, about keeping those traditions alive. Partly because of my own love of it, and partly also because, we may need these skills in the future. We're living in an uncertain world at the moment, both from an environmental point of view, a societal point of view, a political point of view. It really feels to a lot of people as if we're at a really big turning point in the entire history of, modern humanity. And, we just don't know if we're going to ever need sort of foraging skills in the future. And I think that was also behind the Wild Biome Project, because, if you had to go back to eating wild food, if somebody took out the national grid and there was no more electricity, or somebody took out the internet, because everything is so technologically dependent, and technologically dependent urban humans are very, very vulnerable to this. It's very different if you're still living in a rural area with access to land and you've inherited some of the traditions of, country people. But, if people had to go back and live on wild food for short periods, as you see has happened in places like Syria, after the earthquakes, after civil war and things, we actually know nothing about what it would be like for our bodies to be living on those things. And so the Wild Biome Project, which came out of me just wanting to see, could I actually live on wild food for a year? And so many other people said they'd love to have a try. And by recording it scientifically, by keeping data, looking at measurements, doing blood samples, doing fecal samples and things as well, what it gives us is a really clear picture of what is the impact on our bodies, what is the impact on our gut microbiome of making changes back to a wild food diet. And that's been absolutely fascinating. But more than that, collecting the statistics around it and getting people to do a food diary in our Eat Wild app, where we're actually able to measure the nutritional value of it, we can see not only what the nutritional intake is on wild foods, but also how much people are gathering. So a lot of people will say things like, if everybody went foraging, there just wouldn't be enough. But we don't know that. And, my trite answer to that with people is, well, I've never noticed a shortage of dandelions, But because people think of foraging as being competing for the chicken of the woods or the rare mushrooms and things. But in actual fact, we know that, people ate lots of nettle, for example. And if we knew how much, if we know how much nettle or how much dandelion or, what people actually need to eat from doing our wild studies, then what we can actually look at is things like, well, in farming, if we want to have more integrated farming with nature, if we want to have some set-aside land, we can actually measure wild land with wild plants and say, actually, this could feed this amount of people in an emergency situation. So there's a whole food security issue in it as well as a rewilding issue. It has just so many different places it can go.
So the Wild Biome Project, we first started it in 2023. Well, it started with Monica, and during COVID, Monica and Matthew, they wanted to do a year eating as much wild food as possible and not getting anything from a supermarket, only gifted from like friends and like local things. And so they did that. And but they had their guts tested every so often to see what the results would be as the diets changed seasonally. And Monica, being Monica, she wanted to do a bigger study and get data and see how it would affect how it would affect with multiple people if we all lived that way for a certain time, and see what the data comes back as, see how our guts change. And so the first one that we did was in 2023, and I did that for 3 months, and we just ate only wild food. There's a couple of things that we were allowed to substitute in, such as we can't harvest wild birds' eggs in the UK, so we did substitute the odd chicken egg if we found a bird's nest or something like that. And but after 3 months, or even after each month, ideally, but after 3 months, we did have our guts tested, and we had our blood test done before and after the time had passed, and it was compared how our results changed over that time. And I did that in 2023, and that was a lot of the AOF were involved in that one. There wasn't many people outside of it, so it was very much pioneered by the Association of Foragers. And then last year we opened it up a bit more, and we had over 100. I think we had about over 150 people join in. Show their interest, and I think in the end we had like 100 or so take part in this big study. And some of them have now joined the AOF, like Hetty and Rebecca and a few others, and it's just amazing. What I realised in the last one was that we had so many people, and again, it comes back to community and connection. So we were able to have more meetups. The diversity of food that we were eating was amazing, and we just eating all wild, and we came out healthier at the end of it. It's just.
And how was that for you personally?
For me personally, it's the best I ever eat, really. I mean, but it's tricky in the modern world, because if you want to do other things, it's that convenience sort of factor. But I didn't slip too far afterwards. I only stick to farm shops and things like that, and still forage food seasonally. But I maybe lost about 8 kilos this time. The first time I lost 12. I wasn't even that big to start with, so it's crazy. But because I kept to sort of a similar theme in terms of the carbohydrate to fat to protein ratio, I didn't really put on any weight after the last Wild Biome. Like even over winter, I've stayed a pretty good balanced weight. So you can I'd take parts of that and applied it to like an everyday diet, and it has helped. Yeah.
And did you feel like a difference on a mental level?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of clarity, and in terms of senses as well, because you know what they say, like the gut microbiome does speak a lot, and make a lot of decisions that we don't realize. So if you've got a healthy gut, often the mind is a lot clearer as well, and your senses are a lot more stronger. And yeah.
Yeah, I find when I eat a lot of wild plants that I become more like feral almost. And it's like, yeah, sometimes when I have to go to the civilized world, then I think, oh, I have to eat some more like civilized food because I will feel totally lost in the civilized world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I must admit, I sort of hide from the civilized world quite a bit. I'm quite introverted. I'm lucky to just be in the countryside. So the most that I'll ever go to in terms of food-wise, especially, is farm shops. Sometimes I'll go to the supermarket for the odd small bit of convenience, mostly kitchen towel. But the odd time I will get the odd treat that I can't get from a farm shop. But it's but that's a completely different world. You walk into those situations, and the senses just are a bit crazy. And I mean, before the wild biome, I did do a pretty long stint of, I think it was about 4 years. And all I did was run more like a small holding. I had goats in the nature reserve, free range, living off the milk, but then I'd forage all throughout the seasons. So that was probably the healthiest I'd ever been for about 3 or 4 years. And it's just completely different. And yeah, as you say, I felt a whole lot more feral than I still do anyway. But it's yeah.
You know, I think because a lot of people eat a diet that's sort of either fairly processed or it's quite restricted, because, you know, the year that I ate only wild food, I ate about 300 different plant species, 87 fungi species, 20 seaweed species, you know, a wide variety of game and insects and fish and shells and things like that. And, you know, but even if people are cooking from scratch, the availability of different species in the average supermarket, I mean, it's better in some of the more richer or the wealthier urban areas, is actually quite limited, you know, and many things are just varieties of the same thing, like, you know, cabbage and, you know, and broccoli and cauliflower, you know, they're kind of all the same thing, really. You know, because people are eating restricted diets from a wild point of view, or processed diets, a lot of people have gut problems nowadays. And so people will tend to avoid all peas and beans or everything in the nightshade family. And a lot of people have problems with oxalates, for example. But what I actually found was moving from the winter to the spring, when I started to eat lots of dock shoots and sorrel and, you know, plants that we know to be quite high on oxalic acid, was that instead of getting, you know, kidney stones and things like that, which people always worry about, the bacteria in my gut, called Oxalobacter formigenes, it basically just increased 1,100% to deal with it. So it just denatures it. And besides that, you know, there's different ways of cooking. You know, if you understand the traditional ways of cooking and processing things, you know, our ancestors were really good at making a lot of potentially troublesome plants actually much safer to eat by different types of, you know, fermenting or cooking or leaching or combination. You know, which is why traditionally people would have always eaten rhubarb with cream, because the oxalic acid reacts with the calcium in the cream and, you know, renders it, you know, harmless for your gut.
People are scared of greens or wild greens. I even coined the term herbophobia for cultures which are scared of eating greens. And I was researching it in different countries, you know, to what level people collect wild greens. And people in Poland used to collect a few species during hard times, especially nettles and lamb squatters and sorrel. Sorrel is a regular part of cuisine. And nettles also, they're widely known, and people used to eat them, but they were perceived as poverty food. But generally, not so many species. So even in historical recounts from 19th century, they're not longer than 8 species, which is in contrast to Southern Europe, where people collect a lot of wild greens. And there was one ethnographer in Poland, Moszyński, who wrote about it a long time ago, in the 1960s, saying that he thinks it's because in the plains of Northern Europe, of Central Europe, the farming was there was a high level of farming, and people had flat fields, and also there was enough moisture, so that if there was famine, the amount of, for example, nettles or lamb quarters would be enough to temporarily put it in the food, and people didn't have to know everything. Whereas in Southern Europe, where people lived often in rocky ground with prolonged dry season, they had to really know many species to include them in the diet. But I want to also say that eating wild greens is probably something a bit secondary, that in our evolution, in many hunter-gatherer groups, people don't eat many wild greens. Actually, for example, in the Amazon, people don't eat them at all. And we think that eating wild greens is a product of farming, that they create some kind of food system. So in primitive farming, people would have one crop, but then they would have weeds which were competing with the crop. So they would take them out, but they would benefit from them eating them. So if you don't have fields, you don't have a lot of good wild greens. If you go to the tropical forest, most leaves are hard and not palatable. So you have to have weeds or some kind of water plants. So if you look at ethnographic record of what hunter-gatherers use, they do use greens, but usually not so many species. And because they had access to meat and, fruits and roots, they would be more important to provide calories, because the calories were they were what people were missing. Yeah. And now we have, cheap calories. So we turn to greens because they bring flavor, they bring vitamins, etc.
That is so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so maybe I will spread the term herbophilia and herbophobia is similar to mycophilia and mycophobia. Yeah, and that there's a spectrum of cultures. So we have highly mycophobic cultures, like in the Amazon. You would have highly herbophilic cultures, like in Southeast Asia, and you would have something in the middle, like in many parts of Europe, that people would collect a few species. Another thing that I research is the use of ferns in the world. I wrote the book Edible Ferns of the World, and I'm compiling all the information about eating ferns in the world.
Yes, but because there is a lot of misconceptions about eating ferns, I think.
Yeah, there's some kind of pteridophobia, in the fear of ferns in cuisine, whereas in Asia, people experiment with ferns. And in many countries, people eat a few species which are probably most abundant or tastiest. But sometimes they discuss things, like some people would eat it, some people would not eat it. I once made an amazing meeting in a Tibetan village in Western China. The villagers came, and I brought specimens of all the ferns I found. It was amazing to see how people were discussing, oh, I eat this fern, I don't eat this fern,
So you have been traveling a lot, I think.
Yeah, to document the wild foods, I as much as I can, because it's time consuming, and I just had some contacts, so I went where I could, have help with the local from local ethnobotanists.
That's really great, because one of the things I've been doing with the podcast is just going all around Europe and talking with foragers and herbalists and asking them, what is the local legal framework for foraging or for herbalism, and what is the basic knowledge of general public when it comes to botany, or and it's or some basic cultural traditions that they have, historical use. And I think it's so interesting to see all around Europe these differences, and how in some countries the
the laws are really strict when it comes to foraging, and in other countries there's hardly any law at all, or in some cultures there's not even like a word for foraging because everybody is still doing it.
Yeah, and Poland is quite free. You can collect mushrooms in any forest, and if it's a private forest, people would still let you forage mushrooms, unless it's near the house, or maybe some strange people would. But I've never seen a notice in the forest, private land or something, So people go into the forest and they don't worry. And with herbs and greens, also, if it's not near the house, if it's not obviously cultivated, you would pick it. There are some specific laws about taking plants from other people's gardens. Actually, there is a law with a paragraph, but the fine is like ridiculous, something like 10 or 20 euros. Yeah, but no one ever applied it probably. But of course, if you go near someone's garden or house, some people would kind of maybe tell you off. But generally, it's a practice that you go and don't ask. I've been foraging for decades, and I was also collecting seeds for wildflowers in meadows and grasslands, and I never ever asked for permission because people would not even understand why I ask.
Yeah, this reminds me of what Monica Wilde said, that it's like one of the last things in our society that is not controlled and not, everybody can go foraging. It's like no matter what your social class is, your gender, your history, anyone can do it. And I think that is one of the powers of foraging, that it's really such a thing that anyone can learn and anyone can do it.
Yeah.
What was the most surprising thing that you found out about wild foods while doing research?
I think something that really struck me, and I think it's a good advice for foragers, that when I was studying traditional communities in Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Georgia, which use a lot of wild vegetables, they always cook them for at least 10 minutes, traditionally even half an hour, and take the water out. I always tell people, like when I start foraging course, when they start the course, I say, the first thing, collect the young shoots, don't take the old plants. And second is boil. If you're not, it's if you want to eat more of the green stuff, actually it's safer to boil and take the water out. And this removes 99% of danger from even if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think these also in China, like we associate, Chinese cuisine with stir frying things, but actually in traditional communities in China, I was doing research in a few provinces, but in central China, people would collect wild plants, they put them in the boiling water, take the water out, and then fry. So there's this one stage of actually boiling for 1 minute,
Yes, and it's interesting because I remember one of my students told me that she said, I found this group of Asian women and they were picking black nightshade greens. And I always thought of them as being toxic, but it's also the way that you prepare them, I think.
You have to boil them. But you mean Solanum nigrum, yeah?
Yes.
It is traditionally eaten in Greece as well, in horta. So also in Greece, they boil it and after boiling. But, we think of healthy food as maybe raw salads. Of course, when you have nice, clean, fresh, soft shoots, it is the best thing to eat it raw. But with many species, actually, if you want to eat more, you have to cook it. So people are surprised when they come to my workshops. They think they will have a lot of wild salads. And actually, they do have some, but most of the stuff I serve is boiled.
Do you see like an increasing interest in foraging in general?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the biggest increase I've ever seen was obviously over COVID. That was like huge, just boom. Everyone wanted to be foraging and wanted to be, doing things at home, making sourdough and doing anything to kind of connect with nature. But I think the increase has sort of slowed, but it's definitely still increasing. And I think it's because we're living in a mental health crisis. we are, so vulnerable as human beings who live in this mad world that's really not suited to our emotional and spiritual and even physical needs. So we're all kind of these broken people looking for something to make us feel whole or make us feel connected. And, people say, oh, well, go and have a walk. And it's like, well, that's not really good for your mental health. You can just walk around the woods, but your full mind might be thinking about, oh God, I've got this deadline and the kids have got this and I've got to do this. And so sometimes, and I think for a lot of people, especially with busy brains, having a walk isn't enough. So I think that sometimes people are looking for a way to connect with nature and a way to feel better, but they need almost like an activity. And foraging is such a great activity because you use all of your senses, and then it's suddenly your walk becomes a mindfulness practice. So I think, the interest is increasing because people need something to help them feel connected to the land in a world that is really disconnected.
And how do you see it evolving over the next decades?
I hope that there will be an increased interest in foraging. More and more people will come to it. And I think when you get into foraging, when you start picking your food from the land and when you start, because it's really, before you even start eating anything, foraging is primarily study. So you're studying the plants and you're learning about them and their life cycles. And with that, you're learning about the insects and you're learning about the seasons, and you're you're really learning about the natural world in its entirety. And I don't think you can learn about foraging without falling in love with the land and starting to feel like a guardian of the land. So what I hope is that there'll be a slight culture shift, similar to how we have in other countries where foraging is really part of their culture, to people saying, hey, no, look, we have a right to go out and we should be able to collect clean, nutritious food from the wild, because I'm not happy with huge corporations and massive landowners coming in and taking over huge areas of our land and, spraying it or putting up gates and fences and saying, no, you can't come in. So I hope that there will be a raised interest and a bit of a public outcry and, to say, hey, we deserve access to these spaces and we deserve to be able to come and pick from these landscapes. And I think there's some really beautiful examples of rewilding areas that have also incorporated foraging within that and, growing wild food forests and even, council changes like, okay, right, we need to grow some more trees. Let's make them fruit trees. And, just little things, I think that if there are more people with an interest in collecting wild food, that there will be more areas. And, if you think about housing developments, we have started thinking, solar energy and green spaces, but why not also add in, okay, well, let's create an area for these people to forage and let's plant fruit trees down the roads and let's make sure people have access. And so, I hope that we'll move in a direction like that.
Yeah, I sometimes I'm surprised that still the collective thinking is not involving foraging. For example, like the government in Belgium is now encouraging people to make like an emergency package if there is a power breakout or a fallout or maybe a war coming up or whatever. And they say, you should have like a torchlight and extra batteries and some medication, some emergency supplies and like food for at least a week. But somehow they never think about the knowledge about foraging. And I think that's why, because when you know about foraging, your knowledge, it will not expire. You cannot lose it. It's because it lives inside you. And that's like one of the best things you can have to fall back on. But governments somehow don't think like that. And I find it particularly interesting. So I also hope that more and more people get into foraging because I can see the transition. It's not just learning the skills, but it's a new way of thinking also and a new way of feeling and experiencing the world, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important because a lot of a lot of people, especially like inner city people and kids, they don't know where their food comes from. They don't have that connection to the land, and the land starts to be seen as a commodity. What can we do with it? How can we change it to our own benefit? But to explore and kind of spread that idea that like the land has everything we need, and it's a resource that we have to feed into and look after. And if we do, we will have everything that we need. And I think it is that mindset, which I think a lot of people would like. I do think that mindset, in my eyes anyway, a lot of people who are more nature-centred, they're much happier people. And the people who are more financially, driven, maybe less so, in my experience. And yeah, I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to help change people's mind and see the land as something that is so very important. And yeah, like you say, it's a funny thing that it's still seen as something that's quite weird. Like the government are literally telling us like, no, guys, it's not a conspiracy. You need water to last you 7 days. And people are still like, oh, I don't need to know how to forage my own food. I'll go to the supermarket. And we're so reliant on and confident in the current, civilization and the culture that we have. But our ancestors weren't stupid or primitive. They were incredibly intelligent and had knowledge that can really, really help us, whether it's in a modern day society or whether, it's maybe if things go down for 7 days or 2 weeks or whatever. And it's knowledge that is, it's incredibly important for survival. But even if it's not for survival, just for well-being and personal growth, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I think we should definitely keep alive all the knowledge that we still have. I think that's also an advantage of coming together as a group, that you can exchange these experiences. We all work towards the same, reconnecting people with the land. And for me, that's really one of the worst diseases of the Western world, that we have this disconnection to the land. And
not just the disconnection to the land, but disconnection to each other. Mm. And you mentioned a very important word there, tribe. Nature was always cared for and stewarded for by a species that was an integral part of it, which was humans. We're not separate from nature. We're very much part of it. And our indigenous, the indigenous peoples and, the indigenous peoples in the West, we knew how to live in balance with it. And now we're very fragmented, particularly with the way that global politics is. It sets us against each other. It isolates us from each other in these sort of fragmented nuclear units. And coming back together and finding community with each other, finding a tribe with each other, finding, that special bonds with each other is the only way out of some of the mess that we're in, by remembering that we're actually as different as we are to each other, that we're all human and that we're all very much part of nature and part of this earth. And, I think for a lot of young people as well, a lot of people are, a lot of people travel to other countries and look at, indigenous traditions from other places. Now we have this really deep yearning to reconnect with ourselves and our own ancestral lineage and our own roots in this earth. And they are very much under our feet, wherever our feet go onto the ground, it is there. And true connection comes through your own sense of place and where you are too. And, that ability to connect here and with the other people around us in this way, as this tribe, as this community, is really powerful. And, the AOF, we have members we have some young members who are in their 20s, and you've got older people like me who are, in their 60s, and I'll be still coming here in my 70s and 80s and 90s, I promise, and sitting in the corner, and people go, who's that weird granny in the corner? But, it crosses so many things. It's the true representation of a village, with all ages and with all different types of people, and, embraces so many different people and different opinions and things, but in a way that truly represents some of the best of what humanity can offer each other.
So what is like a last message you would want to share with the world?
It's such a big question. What message do I want to share with the world? I think in general, I mean, really, at the end of the day, nothing you have you can take with you. It's things like building skills and finding a kind of true contentment and happiness that really matters. And I think whatever that is to you, it's always good to kind of focus on the things that are going to bring you kind of like a deep, lasting happiness. And for a lot of people, that comes with spending time in nature. So I think if anyone's feeling a bit kind of lost or disconnected or maybe not quite happy, just a half an hour mindfulness session in whatever way you want, and even if people are from quite straight and standard walks of life, just to take yourself into the woods and sit down and use all 5 senses. It'll feel weird at first, but, no one's looking, no one cares. And just to do that, I think is a really nice start and a really good way to break out. And I think for the majority of people, it only takes that first experience of real, like, being able to take a deep breath and kind of shake off and sigh off like the real pressure of modern society that leads to more. And whether that's foraging or, I don't know, could be anything like bird spotting, basket making, like whatever that thing is, definitely the happiest people I know are entwined with nature in some way.
Yes, because I think it's more than just, like in modern society, you're always expected to be productive and more and better and greater. And when you work with nature, yes, you can do things like foraging and basket making and all of these things, but it's also about being. It's more being than doing. And somehow in modern society, we seem to have forgotten how to be humans. And that is so weird when you think about it.
Yeah, I think it's very much, we are pushed to produce, and it's just such it can feel good, it can be like, oh great, okay, I've got a lot done today. I think it doesn't always feel deeply nourishing. And I think to remind yourself as well that, like, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they weren't working constantly. They weren't farming. They hadn't started agriculture. They had a lot of time and they played. And they had free time. They could, stare off into space. And those moments that I always think about it, like if I'm sitting down and staring off into space or just not really doing anything, someone might come in and say, "You're not doing anything. Come on. What have you done today?" Or, the guilt that you feel at the end of the day if someone says, "Oh, what have you been up to then?" And you're like, "Oh God, I haven't really done anything. Like, I can't really tell them what I've achieved." But actually not to feel guilty about that, because it's such an important part of the human experience. And it's such negative in our culture, but actually it's so rewarding and it's so necessary to give your brain space to be creative and or sometimes just blank.
What is the last tip you would give to new foragers, people that are really totally new into it? Like, would you recommend to them, like, being part of a tribe like the AOF or how to get started?
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's so different for different people. Like, there's foragers I know who are just like, they're very solitary and that works for them and they just want to go out and spend their time in nature. And then I know people who, they want to be part of a tribe and they want to go out with others. And, I think that is how it would have been done, probably more historically. But at the same time, you do always have people who want to spend time more by themselves. So I don't know, what would my advice be? I guess one thing I get asked quite a lot is, I have like maybe a fear around foraging and where do I start? Because there's all these plants, but I'm not really sure how to learn them. But what I would say is there are so many plants that you already know and you can already identify that have 101 amazing uses. You can eat them, you can make twine out of them, you can make medicine with them. And I think if you start with the plants that you know and you feel comfortable with, you're almost building on a previously established relationship. And once you've, I don't know if it's nettle, you've made your nettle stew or you've made your curry or whatever you're going to make, and then you've tried your tea, you've done your medicine. You can just take it in steps, and you don't even need to start with new plants. You can just deepen the relationships that you've already had, because so many of us, we have stories or we have memories about a blackberry or a nettle, and it might not be a good relationship. You might have been stung, or your mum might have told you like, oh, don't eat that. But just to build on something that's already existing, I think is a much easier thing to do than kind of throw yourself in at the deep end and try and find these new plants that you don't know what to do with. And if you are a sociable person, to do that with other people, and maybe family, maybe friends, or an association, or whoever you find, is a really rewarding experience. And as you say, you can. It's always more exciting, isn't it, if you've made a nettle soup or a nettle pakora, to share that with someone else and get good feedback or bad feedback, and to try what other people have made is incredibly rewarding. And if you can get a friendship group into that, a similar hobby, or maybe make new friends to do it with, it's definitely a fun thing to do.
How do you see the future of foraging, like for the next decades?
There may be more interest. There may be more regulations because there's more interest. There may be a war, so there'll be periodic, even more increase in foraging. We don't know, It was there, it is there, and it will be there,
Yeah, that's beautiful. It was there, it is there, and it will be there.
Different,
Yeah. But it's a very reassuring thought that it will be there.
Yeah.
Is there one last thing you would like to tell?
I think to all people out there, seek community, make community with each other, center your lives around community. Don't be put off by making the first move to reach out to other people. If you live in a village and you like foraging, and you've seen somebody at the other end of the village and you know that they go and pick mushrooms as well, don't think of them as competition to who can get the chanterelles first. Strike up a conversation, talk to them. Don't live your life behind a screen. And because, community is really where change will come. That's really where change will come. It always comes from the grassroots. It always comes from the bottom up. The more that we're in community, and the more we have the power to actually change this world for the better.
Beautiful. Well said. Yeah, and I think foraging really helps with that as well, because I see in my neighborhood, I know so many of my neighbors just because as a forager, you move more slowly in the landscape. Like I walk a lot, and then you meet a neighbor and you have a little chat, and a little chat becomes a longer chat. And this is how you get to know your neighbors, not by just getting into your car and driving somewhere to get your food, but if you're just walking around in the area, or sometimes they see you picking and they start a conversation. Hey, what are you doing there? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know. So yeah. That's really helpful when you want to connect with your local community, I think.
Yeah, and also to inspire other people about the world that we live in. It isn't just in a hermetically sealed concrete box in a town behind a screen. There's a whole world out there. And you might encounter somebody you might be out. I mean, I think round my way, they sort of think I'm like strange but harmless. And, but sometimes people say, what are you picking? It could be dangerous. It could be poison. How do you know that's not poisonous? Is a common question. And I'll explain, because I teach people about wild foods, and they start to get interested, and you have a chat and they go, well, I didn't know that. And that's one of the reasons that, I teach foraging. It's not necessarily that in one foraging walk, somebody can identify everything, but it's, for me, it's success if people come away going like, gosh, all that I've learned, what an amazing place we think. I never knew. And they want to learn more, because the planet that we live on is the most incredible place, and life amongst the way that life has created this richness of species of plants and fungi and animals and all the different things that they do, the way they communicate with each other through biosemiosis and signaling and everything about it is just so awe-inspiring.
Yes.
Absolutely awesome. And those little encounters with people, if I know I've set them on that journey of discovery, job done.
Exactly. It's that spark, that seed, that moment of awe that does it all, really.
And it's so important because, we're facing ecological destruction on a massive level because people are disconnected. And it's really about the fact that, if you're in a relationship with somebody, if you're dating and you're in a relationship with somebody and you don't spend any time with them at all, you're going to break up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just take all the time and never give, it's just take, the other person's going to, the relationship's going to break up. And, we talk about relationship with nature, but it's sort of a little bit far removed as if it's about policy and things like that. But it's not, it's about passion. It's about passion. If you love the earth under your feet, if you're in relationship with nature, you spend time in it, not watching it behind the telly, but outside, spend time with nature and you give back. You don't just take. If you just take, you're not going to be able to forage for the next year or the next year after that either. So, this is what I meant about, most of the foragers I know, certainly in the AOF, they become the most conscientious environmental stewards because they know where the gaps in the hedges are and will go and replant stuff. And they go back to places they've harvested and scatter the seed around. They care for the land around them. And that is true relationship. That is a true relationship with nature. It's not just about connecting. It's about loving.
Mm-hmm.
It's about love. In the end, there is only love.
A warm thank you for listening, Wildie. Are you feeling a wild itch after this episode? Well, just head over to wildplantforager.com and feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm looking forward to the next episode. I hope you'll be there. But for now, just go outside and follow your wild heart. As a founding member of the Association of Foragers, can you tell us a little bit about how it all got started 10 years ago? Because it's now the 10th anniversary.
You'll probably get 5 different versions of that answer. Well, I think, so 10 years ago, on the foraging scene, people were quite disconnected from each other. There were lots of lonely people who weren't allowed to talk about plants anymore at home or fungi anymore at home, or their partners were going to leave them. And of course, social media was just starting to connect people. So people were just starting to become aware that there were other like-minded souls in the world. And for about sort of 4 or 5 years before, a few of us had started to actually meet up. And particularly in Scotland, I'd made friends with, Mark Williams, and then met Robin Harford when he came up, and I'd met Miles, and John Wright was coming up. And we'd had a couple of meetups, and then Mark started working with the botanist, and they offered to put up a little foragers summit on Islay. And so Mark also invited Andy Hamilton, John Renston, and they had the only condition for it, they were going to have this sort of, free holiday for us on this little island, this little foragers get together. And we would have to agree to them making a little film and taking some pictures and stuff. So we all met on Islay and we had a riotous time. I mean, you can imagine, what the cocktails were like and we all cooked for each other and shared stories and shared drinks. And it was a really lovely time. And at the end of it, we found such a sense of community with each other that we just didn't want it to evaporate. And Andy Hamilton, I think, started a Facebook page because, we knew of other people who hadn't been able to come, or other people teaching foraging as well. And I think initially it was mooted that we were going to call it the Intergalactic Federation of Foragers. But what happened was we ended up having a real, in real life meeting in Bristol, and just put out the word on social media that, if you were teaching foraging, you could get together. And so 10 years ago, in December 2015, 23 foraging teachers ended up meeting in a vegan cafe in Bristol and debating whether or not they wanted to be together and to do something. Because there were a lot of issues we were facing at the time. There was, the serious note behind this was that there were a lot of land-owning organisations trying to ban foraging or ban picking and to keep people out off the land. And as I said before, this is our heritage. This is really important to a lot of us. And we were, very fragmented. What we needed to have was a visible community where people could go to for information, where we could support each other, where with the younger generation of foragers coming up, we could encourage them and teach them about best practice, about sustainability, good harvesting practices, things like first aid and insurance, this sort of mechanics of things. And above all, to provide a visible community of people who cared passionately about the land. And none of us could really agree on what we wanted an association to be or to do. And so at the end, we proposed that we vote for something. And we literally had a vote. All those in favour of something, as in something to be determined, all those in favour of something, raise your hands. And there was a unanimous vote for something.
Right.
And then after that, having worked in very entrepreneurially in businesses and things like that, I realized that, when you have momentum, you need to seize it and grab it. And after that, James Grant and I went away and we put together a website and had a forum and things like that and started to get that moving. And originally we wanted to be a very totally flat structured hierarchical organization. And but after about a year, I realized that it was quite difficult to keep the momentum going without other people who would, take a little bit more of a driving role. And so we formed a committee. And I think I was on the committee for about 8 years. And thankfully, I've been having a break for the last sort of 2 years. But and what we found was through the meetups particularly, the meetups during the year are really important, that, real life experience of being with people. And they've grown. I mean, we've got 78 people at this meetup and close on to 200 members now. So the meetups have been, a really wonderful opportunity to be together, over 4 days, to cook for each other, to share recipes, to just share stories, just to make friendships. And some of those friendships have been amazing. And that gives people the ability to sort of connect across not just this country, but many other countries as well. We've got people here from Poland, we've got members in Norway, we've got members in the Netherlands, we've had members in, America and Australia and Cyprus and Italy, and it's actually been a wonderful sort of connection globally, although it's mainly sort of centered in the UK. And I think it's given the public and certainly the media a place to go for information that is genuine and good. And it's also meant that we have a good quality of delivery in this country. And that, I think that's really important. I mean, when I first started doing this, a lot of people said, "Oh, you're mad. You're training and supporting people who are going to be your competition." And I was like, "No, but you're always going to have competition, always. And if you spend your whole life looking over your shoulder, wondering who's coming up behind you, all of that energy is just wasted. What you need to do is just focus on your own passion and your own path and forge that ahead and be generous with information and share. Because if you're going to have competition, what you want is good competition. Mm. If you get interested in photography, for instance, you don't just go out and get one book on photography. You buy all the books on photography that you can afford. Or you don't just go to one particular website or follow one particular person. You follow lots of people. And it's the same with foraging. If somebody comes on a walk with me and is inspired by foraging, they're going to also look at, well, who are the other teachers and things like that. So we're far stronger as a community of people. And, when it does come to things like, restrictions for access to land or, challenges to things, or even, guidance being given out to people about foraging, what we can offer is a united response of a group of people who've really thought this through. The first thing we did when we set up the association in 2015, the very first thing that we did, apart from putting up the website, was to, as an exercise between 23 very radically different, very neurodiverse collection of people, the first thing that we did was we worked out a mutually agreeable set of principles and practice, which are still on the website and are a condition of being a member. You don't have to have a certificate and, a diploma in foraging teaching, but, you are, supported in membership by, your peers through the entry process. But also you have to agree to abide by the principles and practice, which are at the heart, because being sustainable is at the heart of what we do. And, there's media controversy every year. I mean, it's autumn when you get a headline about, naughty mushroom pickers raiding the forest and so on. But really what I know is that everybody who is really passionately interested in foraging, and certainly every member of the AOF, is, the most conscientious steward of this earth. We know, what's happening with the flora and the fauna and the fungi, in our neighborhoods at the most intimate level. We see what needs to be preserved, and we care passionately about keeping it that way and about keeping people's access to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say I'm so grateful that you founded the AOF?
Well, not just, it wasn't really just me, it was, Mark and John and Andy at the beginning who also wanted to hang on to this. And then those 23 people who came, and every single member since, we are, as a human can't live without the bacteria in our guts, we cannot live without each other. And it's every single member that has made this special.
Hi, Wildling. Hey, I'm still looking for some more interesting guests on European herbalism and foraging. So if you know anybody that would want to be a guest in my podcast series, please feel free to reach out and contact me through social media, Wild Plant Forager, or through my website, wildplantforager.com. Thank you so much.